Hi everyone, welcome to Top of the Funnel, the show where content conversations begin. I'm Natasha Puri, your host, and I lead content marketing for Pepper. On today's episode, we have someone who has been on both sides. He has been a writer and he is currently the inbound marketing director for CoSchedule. Well, there's a lot of conversation about what is inbound marketing, what is content marketing, and everything in between. And I'm hoping that today having Ben Saylor from CoSchedule with us will help us answer some of these questions and also kind of help us understand what is the role of content when it comes to inbound and how do they work together really well. On that note, welcome, Ben, and thank you for doing this. So, on to the first question. Um, can you walk us through your role at CoSchedule, and what does it mean to be an inbound marketing specialist, and what does your typical day look like? And also, if you can talk about, what is your how collaboratively do you work with the content team? How is it structured? For you, that would be great for us.
Yeah, certainly. So I am the inbound marketing director here at CoSchedule. Our inbound team is relatively small. It's myself, and then I typically have one or two interns on the team at a time. So it's typically myself. We have one intern right now, and we're currently looking to add another. And so inbound for us kind of fits into our broader marketing team, which is divided between inbound, product marketing, marketing design, and marketing automation. So it's actually a rather large marketing team when we look at it as a whole. It's about 10 people or 10 full-timers. And then I think we have just as many interns. So it's quite a large department. As far as what a typical work day looks like, it really varies quite a bit just depending on what we're working on. I manage relationships with a number of freelance writers that we work with, and I spend time, formulating and directing our content strategy and writing content briefs for those writers. Spend a lot of time on SEO, formula, or like brainstorming like upcoming projects we'll take on, determining like what we should be doing. And so as far as how closely I work with our content team, I pretty much am the content team, in addition to our interns and our writers that we work with. So that's probably the most concise answer I could provide. But if we actually got into the nuts and bolts of what we do, certainly there's quite a bit more to it than that.
So let's pull back a little, because this term content marketing, inbound marketing, they're used, almost no one kind of knows where one ends and the other begins. And most people who are content marketers are very clear that they're two different things, but if you kind of ask them, they're not sure, right? So I'd love to know from you, what is the difference between the two, and on a regular working day, does it seem different? Like how is it different in application?
Yeah, certainly. So I think that I definitely agree that the terms content marketing and inbound marketing sometimes get used interchangeably, even though they are different things. And also, a lot of different people have a lot of different definitions for both of those things. And it doesn't seem to me or feel to me as though the marketing industry itself has necessarily arrived on like a consensus, as to what content and inbound are, or like you say like where one ends and the other begins. But the way that I think about it, I think of inbound marketing as just being anything that is pulling an audience in a way that's non-interruptive or non-disruptive to a user's experience. So That could certainly include content marketing, creating content and pulling in an audience that way. But inbound could also be pay-per-click. It could also be, you could roll email into that. But then some people might think of email or even social. They might think of that potentially as being content too, because everything is content these days. So the way that I think about it, though, is I think of inbound as being this much larger umbrella of anything that you're doing marketing wise that is pulling people in rather than doing something that is disruptive to someone's experience. Like, so the delineation to me would be like, if outbound is like disruptive advertising, cold calling, cold emailing, prospecting, those kinds of like outbound marketing tactics. Inbound could be everything else. Like you could even roll like a lot of different PR disciplines even could be rolled into inbound if you really want to stretch the boundaries of that definition that way. And then content marketing, to my mind, is just one part of inbound. The way that we think about marketing, even though our marketing department is divided along different teams with different disciplines, the way that we think about it is if there is a job to be done and you have the skills to do it, we're not going to worry about whether that's content, whether that's inbound, whether that's whatever label we choose to put on it. And so I guess I don't worry about it too much, but I do think about it a lot with
You
it.
spoke about skill sets, right? So, I mean, I just wonder, the skill sets for both roles seem to be very different, right? Would you agree? Like someone who's probably a good content marketer may not be there as an inbound marketer and vice versa, because I would think there's an element of, say, storytelling or, that sort of comfort with content that is required. Do you think that is a distinction that one can draw?
It's a good question. I think that you could. I think that depending on how we choose to delineate content from inbound. So if we're going to say that content is just like the working definitions for the sake of this conversation, we'll say that content is what we traditionally think of being content marketing, like blogging, video, maybe email, social, SEO. Like those are typically the areas, that I think that people, when we talk about content marketing, I think that's most often what we mean by content marketing. And even within that set of tactics or channels or disciplines, or however we'd like to think about it, you might need many different skill sets. Like someone who's really good at video might not be good at SEO. Someone who's good at SEO may or may not be a skilled content writer, for example. But I think that you're right, because when we think about inbound, if we're talking about like inbound tactics, as a whole, and we start thinking about things like pay-per-click. So yeah, I would agree, that just because someone has skill as a content marketer, it's probably erroneous to think of that person as necessarily being a skilled inbound marketer in general.
But I would think that they work together very well, right? So which brings me to my next question. That as someone so experienced in inbound marketing, what are some lessons or tricks that you can share with creators? So you're also working with writers, right? So what are those little insights that you can share with content marketers or content creators from an inbound marketing lens that they need to implement when it comes to creation or when making a content strategy, things like that?
Sure. Yeah, I think the biggest thing that I would say is that content and inbound and just marketing in general need to be very tightly linked with, the most important thing is to understand where everything fits in the bigger picture. Nothing exists in isolation. I think it's very common for content writers or content teams to just kind of exist in their own silo and just create content and to just want to create more and more and more content without necessarily tying that content back to an overarching content strategy or even just a broader marketing strategy or business strategy. So I think the most important thing, if you're thinking about things as an inbound marketer, and I think if you have inbound marketer as your job title, you're probably thinking more broadly than someone who just has content writer or content marketer as a title. But I think the most important thing that you can do is start with a strategy and start with understanding what do you want your content to achieve for your business. And I think when you think about it that way, it kind of shifts the conversation from let's just make good content to let's make good content that actually helps grow our business. And I think that's a subtle distinction, but I think it's one that's it's really important. I think that if you kind of miss that, what happens is marketers create awesome content and they know that it's good content, but it doesn't produce results. And they wonder why. Like most often the issue is the content is not driven by an actual inbound strategy. So it's they're just creating all this stuff, but they're not necessarily creating the most important content that they could in order to help grow that business. They're just creating what they as a creator think is good. Yeah, I would say start with a strategy. And before you do anything with content, make sure you have some idea as to where that content fits in the bigger picture and what business goals is that content intended to help drive.
That's a really great answer. And I think it resonates with a lot of people in the field, right? Because we are all creating a lot of content. And some of it is good quality content. Yep. with an aim to kind of, at least rank on Google, etc. But it just doesn't, it's not as simple as that, right? I think, pulling back and kind of having that big picture view is really important. And perhaps it is that inbound sort of thought process that needs to be part of the entire content marketing process.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So on that note, can you share some tips for optimizing the lead conversion rate from, say, a blog? And I mean, we can stick to, since, CoSchedule has a fantastic B2B blog itself. I mean, maybe we can talk about that. How you have been optimizing the conversion rates from the blog. Is there a sort of structure one should be following or some big picture advice there?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I'll do my best to answer that. Just starting with how we've done things at CoSchedule. So first off, I mean, thank you for the kind words about our blog. I really appreciate that. I mean, the way that we have approached blogging as a lead generation means or channel or however we want to call it, and for optimizing the conversion rate is, our content strategy is very SEO driven, as it tends to be for SaaS companies. That's typically your number one traffic driver and lead driver. So the way that we've always approached it is kind of the traditional, means of or approach of getting traffic, through organic search, converting that traffic into email subscribers, through very simple opt-in forms. There may be like 3 or 4 fields so that we're not asking for too much information. And then we always want to provide the user with something of value. Like all of our blog posts have some type of resource that will help the reader either better understand or better execute what that blog post is teaching them to do. So for us, that means like a lot of like templates, sometimes guides, ebooks, things of that nature. What we've started doing a lot more of recently is using tools like VWO and what's the other one? Hotjar is another one that we use, and we kind of our marketing team uses that, and then we also have a web team that's like responsible for like all of our development and a lot of the implementation of a lot of different like tests and things that we run. So we kind of collaborate with them that way to use those tools to better understand, how people navigate around our blog, and how people convert. And so we've been doing a lot of testing with different types of pop-ups, like exit intent, top hello bar type banners, footer or bottom banners, um, all kinds of different calls to action and things. And so we've been testing like the frequency of those CTAs, the placement of those CTAs, color, copy, design. And we've really just treated that like a very agile testing process where we try to do as much as we can to either validate or invalidate our assumptions and just keep testing stuff to try to get those numbers to move in the direction that we want them to. And so I would say that in itself is not probably groundbreaking, just to do CRO on your blog. But I think if there is a tip that I could share, I would recommend that you test as much as you can, as quickly as you can. And don't worry too much about what you personally like or which ideas you are personally attached to. Like, let your data guide your decision making.
Now let's switch over a little. I know that CoSchedule also has a podcast. I think it's a really good podcast. I've heard good things about it. I haven't heard it yet, I have to confess. But talking about formats now, why the decision to have a podcast? Do you believe that it's an important inbound marketing tool? And in general, can B2B podcasts be a way to drive more traffic, more inbound traffic? And also, what is the success you've seen, and how do you measure that success with something like a podcast?
Yeah, that's a great question. So at a high level, I do feel that podcasts can be an important inbound marketing tool for sure. I think I don't have any numbers that I can pull off the top of my head, but I think we all know that podcasts as a medium are just exploding in popularity. That's a channel that's just been growing and growing and growing for years now. Podcasts have a number of advantages. And I think one of the most important advantages that podcasts have over other types of content is one that I've heard Jay Acunzo talk about, who's somebody that I would recommend looking up if your viewers or listeners aren't familiar. But something that I heard him say once is that with a blog post, you might get someone's attention, like if you're lucky, for 4 or 5 minutes. With a social media post, it could be a matter of seconds. Email, if you have like a really good newsletter, maybe you'll get their attention a little bit longer than a blog post, but depending on the type of email, that could be just momentary as well, in terms of your ability to engage an individual. But with a podcast, you've got 30 to 45 minutes where you have someone's full attention, or at least a good portion of their attention while they're doing something else, but they're actively listening to you. And that's really powerful. The ability to get 30 to 45 minutes of someone's time, and not only to get that 30 to 45 minutes within the span of that one episode, but to ideally become like something that people listen to habitually, to where you become a part of someone's life because they're listening to you every week, or maybe every day, or every 2 weeks, whatever your cadence is. That is a remarkable opportunity, like when you think about it that way. So for us, I think what success looks like for a podcast, though, I think is something that if you're going to do a podcast, I think you have to define for yourself what success means and what you want to get out of it. And I think it's different. It's different for different brands and different companies and different podcasts. So some different things that you might consider important could just be, you just want to get more subscribers, you just want to get in front of more people, or you want to really pay attention to downloads, or how long people are spending listening to each episode, like, are people dropping off somewhere? And then maybe you can develop some ways to say, if you're doing podcast advertising where you're advertising on other people's podcasts, or maybe you kind of do like your own ad read yourself on your own podcast where you're shouting out your own products. You can, develop means of trying to attribute, maybe like if you can track like a correlation between like an uptick in sales or an uptick in demos or trial starts, or whatever you would consider a conversion to be for the type of business that you run. Or if you're hosting those blog posts or those podcast episodes as blog posts, maybe you can track link clicks, from the blog post to a trial sign up page or something like that. But for us, so I kind of say all that just to kind of just to kind of explain that there are lots of different things that you could consider to be important to measure with a podcast. But for us, we consider our podcast successful, or we get value out of having a podcast just for its ability to help us make connections to other people in the industry. Like, it's a very powerful networking tool for us. So even if we got nothing else out of it, it would be worth it just for that one benefit. It's also very useful for us if we have questions about something. Like, there's just something that we personally want to know more about. Getting an expert on the show and picking their brain for 30 minutes is like getting a half hour free consulting for us. So that's also very powerful and very beneficial for us. And then obviously, the only other thing I really look at is downloads. Like, are people continuing to listen to the show? Are downloads remaining at least consistent? Like, ideally, we want to see them go up, but like, are they remaining consistent? Like, are we holding the attention of an engaged audience? And for us, we kind of think those three things are about as much as what we can reasonably expect out of our podcast. Like, it would be fantastic if our podcast could actually like directly drive sales. But if you think about it, a lot of times, like our podcast isn't like talking about our product, like it's just, we're talking about things that are just of interest to people who might want to buy our product. But there are so many steps that an individual would potentially take between becoming a podcast subscriber and buying a product, to where we will never be able to accurately attribute how much the podcast actually influenced that sale.
I agree. I guess the selling point there is you're also putting out leadership content, right? There's,
Yes.
you come across as a leader, and obviously networking, which is what we're doing here. This is my 30 minutes of free consulting right here.
Sure. Yeah. Love it.
Okay. My final question for you, and we've spoken about how things are at the moment. We have spoken about how the team is structured. And so now we talk about the future. What does the future of inbound marketing look like? And do you see the role of content changing, perhaps in terms of the formats? I don't know. But so what's our future looking like as per Ben Saylor?
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting question. I think that what the future looks like for me and for us at CoSchedule might be different from how it looks for the industry at large. I think one of the biggest things that's changing, for us, like, we've always been really successful with SEO. And part of that is because our company got started at a really good time for that in our industry. We've been around since 2013. And when the company started, and like when our co-founder and CEO, Garrett, like when he first started blogging, there wasn't as much competition. Now there's much, much, much more competition, but we can still compete because we've been at it for so long that we have a pretty high authority website. We can continue publishing content, and we can rest assured that our content will rank just because we have so much domain authority. Well, for someone who's just starting, I think what a lot of companies are realizing is that might not work for them. And so they have to figure out something else. But social media, like organic social, is also way, way harder, to win at than it used to be. Algorithms are much, much less friendly than what they used to be. So I really think that, for us, I think I can see us maybe exploring different formats, like maybe getting more into video, maybe actually changing up our podcast a bit, getting more into CRO, which is something we've been doing, continuing to get more sophisticated with email automation. I really feel like for us, we're just going to continue to mature the things we're already doing because they're working well for us. As far as the future of inbound as an industry, though, that's a very, very good question. And I'm not sure that I have a good answer for it because things are just changing so much right now that I think for like companies that are getting into inbound, that are getting into content, now I think that the way that they approach things is probably going to be much different. Like, but some things that I see, I'm seeing more of a focus on like communities, like groups and things like that. People are kind of going back to that because if you can build an audience where you're not dependent on an algorithm, like I see people finding a lot of value in that. Email, like again, for the same reason, like you can build a list, you can own your list. I could see that, just continuing to be just increasing in importance. So I guess in general, where I kind of see things going, I kind of see the future of inbound going in all kinds of directions that all kind of center around not being dependent on anybody's algorithm and not being dependent on a big technology company's platform to feed you traffic. Because I think that companies are just kind of getting to a point where they're feeling like they can't compete because a lot of those spaces are too crowded. And so I think we're going to see a lot of innovation that just tries to get around that, in one way or another. That's kind of where I see it, at least.
Oh, that's a great point. I mean, communities is definitely something that a lot of people resonate with. And I've asked this question to multiple people in the field, and most of them talk about how communities have to power content, and they have to become the backbone of, like you said, we have to build our own audiences, and
Yep.
we have to circumvent the algos. So yeah, so that's a great point. That's it from me, Ben. Thank you so much. This was a great conversation. I hope you had a good time.
Yeah, I had a great time. And yeah, thanks so much for having me in mind and bringing me on the show. I love talking about this stuff. So yeah, I hope I hope your audience finds it valuable.
Yeah, I'm sure they will, and some great answers there. Thank you so much.